In today's Farm Report, dairy farms are important to America's agricultural production, but the number of dairy farms may be going down. Jim Sulphur with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office has more.
On a monthly basis, all of our numbers come out as far as milk production changes from month to month, but really February is kind of the month that the fun reports come out, where they're really only done annually. I'll maybe call them fun, but I think they're just a lot more statistics, like the number of dairy farms nationally and by state. We've also got a number that looks at the number of heifers inventory that come out by state. Today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about dairy farm numbers in 2014. And when you look at it, dairy farm numbers were down 3.5%. Now that maybe sounds like a lot, but actually that's one of the lowest decreases, or the smallest drops we've had in more than a decade. Part of that probably could be attributed to we had fairly high milk prices in 2014. In most of the areas of the nation, we had a pretty solid feed inventory situation, so that might be why. Currently, there's about 45,000 farms nationally in that are licensed to sell milk. When you think about that, that's not really a very big number. Think of the towns we know that are 45,000 people. We think they're big towns, but that would be every single person in that town owning a dairy farm. And again, that's down about 1,600 from 2013. It's down about 10,000, or just about 20% from 5 years ago, and it's down about 30% from 2004. So over about the last 10 years, we're down about 21,000 farms. We've got about 45,000 farms. And, I don't really expect that number to change. I suspect that we're going to continue to lose farms along the way, but I often think, at what point are we going to kind of stabilize that farm number? And I don't really have a good handle on that, but I hope we continue to have farms. Minnesota continues to rank fourth from a farm number standpoint. New York, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are ahead of us, even though now we rank eighth in milk production. But that's, again, because we tend to have smaller farms. And if you compare us again to New York and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, we have very similar structure from an industry standpoint. So I think it's really important to think about that. It's important, as I mentioned earlier, that or in my program on Saturday, that we need to be thinking a little bit about how we can maintain the number of dairy farms. There's a big push with the Path Forward. I know there's been a lot of information on the radio about how we can tend to grow the dairy industry in Minnesota. And I think instead of focusing so much on the number of dairy farms, what we need to do is focus on the ones that really want to be in business long term, and help, at least from an extension or an education standpoint, try to help them meet their needs and what they need to be to really be successful into the future. This has been Jim Sulphur with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
Hog producers are cranking up production even more than had been expected just a month ago.
We increased pork production again this month, 30 million pounds.
Seth Meyer with USDA's Outlook Board, which is forecasting now just over 24 billion pounds of pork output this year, about 1.4 billion more than last year. In other words, about a 5.5% increase.
So producers have responded to the price signals they were getting earlier, and at the same time, we haven't seen the same effect of PEDV that we did the previous year. Supplies of hogs coming to market have been larger than anticipated, as we observe in the slaughter numbers, so we have been moving up our pork production number for 2015.
But of course, moving down the forecast for average hog prices.
So we dropped it another 88 cents this month, and so now we have a pretty significant decline, more than a $20 decline year over year.
And we'll see what that does to producers' future plans March 27th with USDA's quarterly Hogs and Pigs report. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Nitrogen management is important for ensuring good crop fertility and balanced nutrition in the soil. Dan Martins with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office has more.
First off today, remember the deadline for making all decisions about the 2014 Farm Bill Crops Program is Tuesday, March 31st. So if you haven't yet, make a call to the County FSA office for an appointment today. At the Nitrogen Conference in St. Cloud, John Lamb, U of M soil scientist, shared the news that the University of Minnesota is raising its nitrogen guideline rates for nitrogen on irrigated sandy soils for corn. The rates for nitrogen are still based on the ratio between the price of nitrogen per pound and the value of corn per bushel. With nitrogen at 60 cents per pound and corn valued at $3.60, the ratio is 0.16. The new chart offers a line at 0.15, where the maximum return to nitrogen rate on irrigated sandy soil would be 191 pounds, with an acceptable range from 177 to 206. These rates are based on using best management practices. The most obvious best management practice on irrigated sand is to split applications, as we talked about earlier. You can find the new publication about this by doing a website search for Minnesota Extension Nutrient Guidelines, or you're welcome to give me a call at 1-800-964-4929, or if a local call to Foley, 968-5077. We had some good discussion with a very thoughtful group of farmers at the Nutrient Management meeting in Melrose on March 12th. The topic was largely related to manure nutrient management, but many concepts we think about with manure are useful also to think about with commercial fertilizer and with alfalfa and other legume credits for nitrogen. One question came up about whether we should still be thinking about a pound of nitrogen per bushel of corn we expect, or a pound and a quarter that some people suggest, and some credible agronomists suggest our goal could be 3/4 of a pound if we followed practices that help us keep the nitrogen where the crop can use it. We agreed that that was a real challenge with the kind of May and June rainfall we had last year and for some in 2013. It's been challenging over recent years to think about nitrogen rate guidelines that vary based on the ratio between the cost of a pound of nitrogen and a bushel of corn. Remember, the goal to turn a profit is not primarily to look for how to get the most bushels. Bushels certainly count, but the goal to turn a profit is to figure out where you can spend $1 and get more than $1 back. The outlook of tighter crop budgets again this year should motivate livestock farmers and crop farmers with manure available from neighbors to take a closer look at making the best use of manure nutrients, soil tests, manure tests, crop response research-based fertilizer and manure application rates, and calculating manure application rates. SWCD, NRCS, crop consultants, extension, farm business management staff, and others are ready with resources to assist farmers to accomplish this task. I'm Dan Martins with U of M Extension, and welcome to National Ag Week, March 15 to 21, with the first day of spring, March 20th.
As more countries announce bans or restrictions on poultry imports from certain states and regions of the U.S. because of avian influenza, that poultry is going to have to find alternative foreign markets or markets here at home.
In either case, those pounds are going to a second best market, so they tend to go there with a lower price than we had before.
Kansas State University economist Dr. Glenn Tonsor, he says since the U.S. normally exports 20% of its poultry production, the bans are certainly putting downward pressure on poultry prices.
But it's not the only thing going on causing prices to go down.
First, we've had the strong dollar, making U.S. poultry less competitive in world markets, limiting sales. Secondly,
before all these announcements, we were in the midst of notable expansion of poultry production in particular. So you've already got some, downward pressure on prices that's coming from additional supplies, and we're adding to that this international demand challenge that's following these AI announcements, both of which have been putting some downward pressure on prices.
Which Tonsor says could spill over into the pork and beef sectors depending on what happens with this bird flu situation. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.